Happy Friday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. 55 editions later, 25th on the MMA Globosphere. What is happening, everybody? My name is Davidson Baker. I am the host of this podcast you have chosen to consume today, as well as contributor at Fansided and Cageside Press and MyMMAnews.com and Sports Regime, amongst other things. It's a mouthful. Regardless, back, better than ever. Episode 55. Doubleheader coming back at episode 56 right after this on the NBA side of things with my good friend Tig. But here I am, of course, on a fight week to talk about some good old-fashioned face punching. And what better way to get it in the double dip of interim title goodness. Relax. I know people cry about interim titles, but you can't complain about the quality of fights that sit atop the bill at State Farm Arena tomorrow night. That will be happening live on pay-per-view, exclusively on ESPN Plus. If your grandparents don't know how to order it, you better tell them. You better let them know. You better let them know they're not gonna watch. So yeah. Just a couple quick things to plug real quick before I get down and into it. Check out my newest piece at Fansided this week on Salim Imadaev. He takes on Max Griffin tomorrow night on the ESPN prelims. That's over with Fansided. Be on the lookout. I got my monthly top fights of the month piece that's going to get ready to start coming out every month for Cageside Press. My first piece of that will come out in a couple of weeks. New episode of Around the Cage is out today on the Loudmouth Podcast Network. That is a podcast hosted by yours truly. This week we had James Lynch, Nolan King, Drake Riggs, and Anthony Walker on a really star-studded field. I'm super fortunate to be able to, host a show with panels such as the ones that I am given every single week for that show. I'm really lucky. Wish I could have my input or maybe speak a little bit of my input a little bit more, but hey, man, I'm not going to complain about the title that was offered to me. But in the world of MMA, there is something that has transpired this week that I cannot skip over and must get out of the way. So, TJ Dillashaw. Two-year suspension. USADA hands it down. Okay. Well, I mean, where do you even start here? So here's where you kind of begin to paint the bigger picture of this. You have to start with analyzing exactly what EPO is and exactly what type of, what results from a human body being exposed to this type of, I'm trying to find the words. I'm trying to find the words to describe it. EPO is about the worst thing you could possibly pop for as a fighter. It checks all of the boxes. There is no conceivable possibility on this planet that any type of EPO-driven positive test can come by way of a tainted supplement. There is only one way to insert EPO into the system, and that is by injection. Those who are taking EPO know what they're doing. You don't stick a needle in your ass on accident. So, but what is EPO exactly? EPO, pronounced in the formal term, just talking one word, erythropoietin. Erythropoietin, something like that. Erythropoietin. What it is it's basically a hormone that your body naturally produces, or your kidneys produce in order to assist the accumulation and distribution of red blood cells. If you begin to connect the dots, accumulation of more red blood cells equals a much easier way for oxygen to freely flow through the bloodstream, thus obviously creating a higher level of potential endurance and we're talking rising above the ceiling of whatever potential anybody had from an aerobic or from an endurance standpoint. That's what it's literally, that's what the hormone is literally there for. The more oxygen that's delivered to the muscles, obviously, from the red blood cells being pumped out like they are on the very steroid that they are themselves, if that makes any sense. Obviously, there's a significantly higher level of, aptitude to be game in those 4th and 5th rounds. And you think about TJ's latest fights, obviously, if you want to try to side with TJ on whatever way you can, or cling to any last shred of dignity that his career and his legacy have a very slim chance of holding on to, you would say that, it wouldn't have even helped him anyway because he finished Cody early. In the first fight. He finished him in the second fight. I mean, you're a moron if you operate with that mindset. Don't get mad at me. Don't comment on this. Don't reply to this. Don't send me angry messages. Seek help. You're an idiot. Here is the big picture. For a guy as well-spoken as Dillashaw, for a guy as received as well as Dillashaw in the MMA community, for a guy that's respected amongst his peers, top contenders respected him. Marlon Moraes respected him. Rafael Sunsao respected him. Jimmy Rivera, Aljamain Sterling, those guys respected him. Cody Garbrandt is a very specific case. You can give that a pass. Pedro Munoz respected him. This was a guy that was respected amongst his peers. That's gone, man. That's gone. Every last hair of it is gone. For sure. And here's what I want people to stop saying. I want to be done hearing people say TJ vacated the belt because he knew he was guilty. Wrong. TJ gave up the belt right away when he found out because he knew he was going to get wrong. 100% wrong, no. But mostly wrong. TJ Dillashaw did not vacate his title at the moment's notice of USADA flagging because he knew he was guilty. TJ Dillashaw vacated his belt upon that moment's notice because he knew what he was guilty for. There's a big difference. There is a very big difference. And legacy-wise, man, I mean, this absolutely destroys actual and legitimate conversation held amongst anybody when talking about the greatest 135-pounders of all time. Because that list is not very steep. It's Cruz. I mean, it's Cruz, Dillashaw, and like Faber, distantly far away, kind of. That's it. Garbrandt's run was impressive, but it was not. His sample size is incredibly small as a guy that we would want to talk about putting in any weight classes GOATS conversation. Other guys are carving their own paths, but man, like I said, TJ did not vacate because he knew he was guilty. He vacated because he knew what he was guilty for. Poor Cody Garbrandt. UFC 240 and 241 got dates. It's a little weird. So they're making up for that date that they had in the beginning of the year at the end of January, which was supposed to be UFC 233, the mythical, magical event that never transpired. That is UFC 233. So they had to make that up. Looks like they're making it up on July 27th, UFC 240, and there are no locations yet. But I'll get into my guesses on what I think that those might be. And then you also have, this is all per a Combache or Globo report, that Daniel Cormier and Brock Lesnar are probably getting set to headline UFC 241 August 17th, location to be determined. It's good. At this point, at first, when everything happened, UFC 226, DC becomes double champ. Brock goes in there and for no reason calls out, while yelling at Cormier, calls out the guy that Cormier just beat and the guy being Francis Ngannou who just lost the fight before. Made no sense. And then they had the little push and the... At that point, you're thinking good for Daniel. At this point, now that the booking will come more than a year after all of that happened, let's just get it over with, Nothing about that fight really makes anybody's hair or, stand on the back of their neck, I mean, at least it doesn't for me. You would have a hard time convincing me that a lot of people, at least within my inner circle in the MMA world, can consistently hold and contain a conversation with you about why Daniel Cormier and Brock Lesnar is going to be a competitive contest. There's just too many mitigating factors into questions with Brock, man. But good for DC. If 241 is the one for you, then do it. Hey, best boxer on planet Earth fights tonight. Vasily Lomachenko fights Anthony Corolla, New York City. Friday night, lights. The best boxer on the planet Earth 2-day period, and it's not close. Period. And speaking of Top Rank, I'll quickly divulge into this because I know most people coming to this podcast are here for MMA talk. But if you're an MMA fan and you really can't stand listening to anything about boxing, I mean, what are you doing, man? I get it. If you like MMA and you don't like boxing, that's fine, dude. That's totally fine. Everybody has their preference. But if you're one of those guys that likes MMA and then anyone starts talking about boxing, you're just like, oh, and make a big deal about it. Dude, combat sports is all beautiful under its own umbrella. Come on. Let's not act like the cherry falls too far from the tree. Anyway, I read that Bob Arum, this is just what Bob Arum said, so obviously you can't take that to the bank on any day, but I read Bob Arum wants to make Crawford versus Spence. Given Crawford gets past Amir Khan, Crawford gets past Crawford gets past Amir Khan at MSG next Saturday. You know, all I really know to say to that is, hey, man, what took you long enough, huh? Obviously, we know what took you long enough. I mean, it makes sense for promoters in the world of boxing and how boxing works today to keep those two guys as far away from each other as far as possible. But that's the fight to make, dude. That is the fight to make in any weight class in boxing. Crawford versus Spence is the Tony versus is Crawford versus Spence is the Khabib versus Tony of boxing. I guess Joshua Wilder could probably stake a claim in that just because of the stupid shenanigans that Lindy or that the dumb Wilder people and Joshua people can't come up with, but tis whatever. Tis whatever. Okay. UFC 236. Atlanta, Georgia. Down in the dirty South. Got an interim lightweight and an interim middleweight belt on the line. And some really, 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 really fun fights that precede it. So let's get into it. Obviously, the main event screams fight of the year, 5-round war. These guys are going to bang. Plant your foot in the center and throw. I mean, you know, you see Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier's name on the same line, anywhere near each other on a bout sheet. Pretty fan-friendly and enjoyable imagery could come to one's mind of how that fight could play out. I think there's a lot of ways this fight could play out. I think what I am most excited, the part of the fight that I'm most excited to see is how these two match up from a pure boxing standpoint. These two dudes both have phenomenal boxing. If you could not tell by each man's last 900,000 fights in a row. Particularly the Ortega fight for Holloway and the Gaethje fight for Poirier. There are a lot of similarities to how both of those guys box in those two fights. You see how these guys, when submission grappling is at its highest level in this sport, and we see submission grappling take place at the highest level in this sport, where one guy might be on that level of superiority in a sport that is not that said sport, if you're following along with me, with obvious results differing. However, I am so interested in how these guys will set up combinations. What are they going to do in terms of cutting angles? Who's going to cut off the cage? Who's going to be the aggressor? Who's going to set up the right cage cut to be able to counter more effectively? Those are the things I'm looking for in this fight. I don't take a whole lot from the first fight. It was 7 years ago, and obviously Max was a young little baby then. Dustin, too. Both of them have been through a lot since. As unfortunate as to say, both of them are not favorable matchups in their own right against Khabib. Should either one of these men, respectively, hoist the interim title on Saturday night. And, I mean, I've been debating with myself for a while. I don't know what would be more impressive. The run, well, I mean, you'd have to probably point towards the run Holloway's been on just because of sheer volume and for, a lack of an argument in anything that doesn't derive numbers in this case. I mean, Max Holloway, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is on the longest win streak in the UFC right now actively. And for him to come up to 155 and take out a guy in Dustin Poirier who is fresh off taking out, just making sure my counting is correct, 3 world champions in the sport's most disgustingly stacked weight class that it's ever seen in a row by TKO stoppage. All 3 of them. Anthony Pettis, Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez. So if Max Holloway disposes of Ortega in the fashion that he did and puts away Dustin Poirier, oof. What a resume that is becoming right in front of our very eyes. Because think about what could be next for Max. Khabib. And okay, even if things don't work out against Khabib, hey man, don't worry. 27 other guys tried to have it work out. 27 other guys didn't see it work out. You get to go back to featherweight, where you already have a belt. If he wants to do that. It's a serious cut for him. I do believe, though, that if Max is unsuccessful in winning in succession this fight tomorrow night and Khabib, that the 155 talk probably goes away for obvious reasons. I will deliver my picks afterwards. This is a really, really, really fun co-main event. And as bad as I feel for Kelvin Gastelum, right? As bad as I feel for Kelvin Gastelum, given the fact that you were supposed to wake up on the day of where your biggest dreams potentially are going to come true, and only you can control whether that destiny or not unfolds the way you want it to, and the day where that is potentially realized finally comes, and the way it begins is a knock on your door at a weird hour, leaving you to think that maybe it's going to be urgent if it's this early, and fights off. You got to feel bad for him, man. From undisputed to interim. However, obviously, everybody knows what's at stake here. Let's get this out of the way, too. If Israel Adesanya wins this fight, or Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya in a UFC middleweight championship unifier, is by 37 miles the biggest fight the oceanic region of the world has ever seen. Period. Oof. That'd be a big, big high five and pat on the back for the UFC brass if that happens. They're going to pack out a stadium if they do that. Maybe do that in July on that UFC 241 that I previously mentioned. However, really interesting fight, because if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who has put all their chips in the Adesanya train, okay? Say that you are going into this fight on Saturday night and you are rooting for Israel Adesanya. He's your favorite fighter. You think he's cute. I don't know. I don't know. But say that you are rooting for him for some reason. And that's a consistent and constant thing. When do you begin to worry about the overly persistent as well as consistent tread on the tires this early in his UFC career? And what I mean by that is, this is his 6th fight in the UFC in 14 months. If he wins this fight, man, and captures the interim title in 6 fights in 14 months doing it, hey, man, all the power in the world to him. That is a phenomenal and almost, unfathomable feat. However, I hope they take their time booking him and Rob after that. Take your time, man. Take some time off. I think Adesanya knows that, man. Israel is a smart guy. Israel's a brilliant guy. He probably knows he needs a break more than anybody else. So, anyway. But yeah, you look at Adesanya's other opponents. Gastelum is a little bit different from all of them in his own unique way, but that's kind of the narrative that Gastelum brings along with him every single time. No one's as kind of compact. Nobody kind of carries the kind of compact and stocky body build that he does to pair with said athleticism and dynamite boxing and hands combinations. Hand speed. Kelvin Gastelum is a motherfucker. That is without a doubt. And that is going to be a phenomenal fight. The UFC really wins either way here. Obviously, the Adesanya-Whittaker fight materializing would definitely swing some Australian currency their way big in a big fashion. However, a lot of people still want to see that fight between Gastelum and Whittaker as well. Myself included. So the key I gave to the main event was who effectively uses their game, not even specifically their stand-up game more effectively, but who boxes more effectively. Because I don't see Holloway and Poirier getting into a grappling match. Anyway, the key in the co-main event is simple. It's all about distance management. It's all about that is where this fight ends, begins, starts, rewinds itself, fast forwards itself back, everything. Distance management and how effective both men are able to do what they want in that department is absolutely crucial if your goal at the end of the day is to have your hand raised. Gastelum, it's going to be no secret that Gastelum is going to need to close the distance, but that comes with very, very risky waters he could tread in. Because Adesanya is very, very good at snapping in with quick attacks whenever he sees someone begin to close the distance, like an outside leg kick, or even an inside leg kick. He fakes and feints and gets his opponents thinking whenever he senses they're about to close the distance, so that they are unaware and off balance of when he could counter. We're obviously dealing with a high level striker in Adesanya, but we're also dealing with a very high level all-around fighter and athlete in Gastelum. And I think he said something in his interview this week with Brett Okamoto that I think is 100% correct about himself, and that he just has a will to win. He really does. He has this unsatiable desire for victory that sometimes pushes guys across a line that other guys can't get through. So that's all to keep in mind as well. And I guess I will come back to that towards the end when I give all my predictions, and we'll start with those predictions right now. UFC 236 predictions. So, to recap, since this stat became official, I am 8-5. I went 8-5 in Philadelphia. Not bad, and it could be better, but hey, we roll on. UFC 236 predictions. All right. So, starting with... Okay, my fault. All right, UFC 236 predictions. Card is headlined by Max Holloway, Dustin Poirier for the interim lightweight title. A rematch of a fight 7 years ago, blah, 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 blah. We don't need to go through that whole spiel again. Predictions. All right, so we start all the way down at Fight Pass. You got Brandon Davis moving down to bantamweight after fighting at featherweight for his first 4 fights in his UFC tenure. He's taking on UFC newcomer and kind of a surprising signing given the depth and unbelievable talent there is out there at bantamweight. He's still yet to be signed in the UFC. And I don't say that. Randy Costa is the guy he's fighting. So here's the deal with this Costa kid. So phenomenal striker. One of the guys that was commentating for I forget, I think Cage Titans. It's probably Cage Titans, the promotion that he fights for regionally up in the New England area. They're talking about Costa. One of the commentators said that he has the most deadly high kicks he's ever seen in his life. That was demonstrated by a head kick knockout that Costa scored in the first round. All of Costa's wins are first round knockout, I believe. I know they're all by knockout or KO or TKO. Are they all in the first round? Yep, all in the first round. All in the first minute. So Brandon Davis is going to welcome this newcomer, Randy Costa, who has not been outside of a minute in his pro career to this point. If that sentence right there does not tell you to pick Brandon Davis, I don't know what will if you've ever seen a Brandon Davis fight. This is a beat fight. I mean, no. Did we think he was going to get banana splitted? No. But did we think that... I mean, do you think that any fight Brandon Davis is in, I mean, he's going to be tough to get out of there, man. He's like Kyle. He's like the Kyle Bochniak of the South. Those two guys are like literally the same guy. The same guy. Just different accents and tattoos. And for that reason only, I think Costa, is going to drown a little bit. This is really early for a guy to sign with the UFC. Davis only 1-3 in the UFC, but the odds makers showing him love accordingly at -160. I'm gonna say they're onto something here. I like Brandon Davis by decision. So moving on, but staying in the bantamweight division, kind of an interesting matchup between Montel Jackson and Andre Sukumtat. So we last saw Sukumtat in Moncton. He got a unanimous decision, I believe, over Jonathan Williams. That's going to bug me if I don't remember. That's really going to bug me. Andre Sukumtat, in his last fight, defeated Jonathan Martinez. That's right. That was going to bug me if I didn't get that. Montel Jackson coming off his first win over Brian Kelleher. Odds are really... I mean, so on this entire fight card, you have a bunch of fights where no one is a 2-1 underdog except one guy, and that's Montel Jackson. He's a 5-1 underdog. Or he's a 5-1 favorite, I mean. Montel Jackson's 5-1 favorite. I think that's a little excessive, but nevertheless, I'm going to go with Jackson as well. In a women's flyweight bout, Lauren Miller and Poliana Botello. Botello got snagged by Cynthia Calvillo in a rear naked choke in her last fight. And Lauren Miller got... she walked right into an armbar from Yinan Wu in China last November. So both girls coming off their first UFC loss. Botelya, the minus 165 favorite. You bettors out there, I really like Lauren Mueller at this line. I really, really like Lauren Mueller at plus 145. If you can get Lauren Mueller by decision, is there a prop out for that yet? Is there a prop out for that yet? I'm not seeing one, but regardless. I really like Lauren Mueller. I think she can push the pace. I think she can shuck and jive, stick and move. And I think that she gets it done by decision. Really, really interesting fight at welterweight. Curtis Millender and Bilal Muhammad, both guys coming off of losses in probably what were the biggest spots of their careers. It's going to be interesting to see how these guys rebound. Millender really quickly, like barely over a month since his loss to Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos. Bilal Muhammad dropping a decision to Jeff Neal in January. I'm going to go... this is a really, really tough call. I'm going to go with Millender late. I think Muhammad sometimes has a tendency to try to get in brawls he doesn't need to be in. And I think that costs him in this fight. The highly anticipated debut of Boston Salmon. Bantamweight contest with Khalid Taha. Boston Salmon was on the first season of the Contender Series. Not the last season, the first season. And he's finally making his UFC debut. Johnny Walker was on the Brazil Contender Series, which was like 14 months after Boston Salmon got his UFC contract. And Johnny Walker's already 3-0 with 3 first-round knockouts. However, Boston Salmon has been kind of plagued with the injury bug for sure. He tore his ACL. That guy will be fun to watch for sure. It'll be interesting to see what type of approach he brings to a guy like Khalid Taha, who's very aggressive, who will come forward. And it will be interesting to see if Taha changes up anything with his approach after kind of a failed derived game plan that he had in his fight with Nader Nermani. So, welterweight. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, I put out a piece with Fansided. It's relatively new. It's out today. You should go check that out. About Zelim Imadaev. He makes his UFC debut against Max Griffin. Max Griffin trying to bounce back after a fight that he most certainly won, according to pretty much everybody that watched it, except 2 of the 3 judges, against Thiago Alves in February. And now Griffin and Imadaev are here. This one has kind of an interesting backstory. Griffin and Imadaev are not the best of friends, I guess. Like, Griffin and Imadaev, like, sparred together in the past, and Max Griffin accused Imadaev of, like, trying to throw, like, spinning elbows and flying knees in sparring and, like, trying to hurt his sparring partners, which is obviously a big no-no. So that's interesting. And I actually think Max Griffin hands Imadaev his first loss. And I like Boston Salmon over Khalid Taha. High stakes at flyweight, top 5 matchup. Number 4, Wilson Hayes. Number 5, Alexandre Pantoja. I'm going to be really interested to see what happens if this fight goes to the ground. I would believe the edge goes to Wilson Hayes. But who knows, man. I get it. It's Mighty Mouse, but, like, we also said Wilson Hayes had the distinct advantage on the ground when he fought Mighty Mouse, and he got armbarred. So I think Pantoja is an up-and-coming big-time problem in this weight class for whatever lengths its owners' wishes are for it to stick around. Really sucks. There's some good matchups for him. Oh, and then you have Jalen Turner versus Matt Frivola. This is a phenomenal fight. This is basically like Gastelum versus Adesanya light version before Gastelum versus Adesanya. And what I mean by light version is Frivola is not Turner obviously being in the role of Adesanya, Frivola being in the role of Gastelum. Frivola is not the athlete that Gastelum is. Frivola is just a brawler, dude. He just comes forward. So that'll be an interesting one. Whoever's game plan ends out panning out more effectively in their own right probably gets their hand raised there. That's some expert analysis by me right there. However, it's one of those fights. Matt Frivola is going to look to close the distance and knock Jalen Turner's head off. Turner is going to look to try to stay at bay a little bit and work his kickboxing. Obviously, as we saw in the fight in the UFC where Jalen Turner let the much less long and shorter Vicente Luque, who obviously is an assassin, get close. He got him, knocked him out. However, I think Turner is going to give too many problems to Frivola. I think Turner dances around him. If he doesn't get a decision, he finishes him in the second or the third. And for the main card, rematch, light heavyweight. If you are to ever bet your life and the very air you breathe as you know it on any result of any facet in any fight, it would be that this fight will not need the judges' scorecards. Why do I say that? Well, Nikita Krylov has not ever needed the judges' scorecards, which is amazing to me, man. To never go to decision once in 31 fights, 25 of which you are the winner of. Unfortunately, one of those 6 losses for Krylov came by way of Von Flue choke in their first meeting. I honestly see this fight going pretty much the same way, man. This division, here's the deal with light heavyweight right now. Light heavyweight has a lot of incoming talent that's very raw and is very yet to be developed. However, for as far as its perennial contenders are concerned, it's stagnant. Inconsistent. Who knows who wins this fight? But I got St. Preux by submission. This is another dark horse for fight of the night. Alan Jouban and Dwight Grant. Dwight Grant on a quick comeback or a quick turnaround following his phenomenal KO of Carlo Pedersoli in Prague back in February. Alan Jouban last was seen in February of last year, knocking out Ben Saunders in Orlando. Jouban minus 130, Grant plus 110. Jouban with 9 more fights in the UFC than Grant. Jouban with the same amount of fights under the UFC banner, 11, as Grant has as a professional overall. I think experience might end up being the difference here if you couldn't tell the path I was moving along with. But, I'm going to go with Jouban here. Decision. I think it's a close fight. Could definitely go either way. That's the tale of this whole card. Eric Anders, Khalil Roundtree, another very close call, another very difficult fight to pick. This is really back against the wall time for both of these guys. I don't know about backs against the wall, like you lose, you're gonna get cut or anything like that. I don't know if it's that it would be that severe. But both of these guys need a win. Or if not need a win, could certainly use one. And I like Anders to do it. Second round TKO. As I said earlier, I think the co-main event all comes down to distance management and how well that management and how well that distance is managed per se. And I think that's Adesanya's bread and butter, man. I also think that any type of wrestling, I think Adesanya is as real as as advertised in terms of stifling, these guys that try to grind. And the only round I've seen Adesanya not do that very well was the third round of the Vettori fight. The only round, in my opinion, that I have seen him lose in the UFC thus far. I thought he won all three against Anderson. You could argue that Anderson won the third. But everything that Adesanya's shown me in the UFC thus far against formidable guys. I mean, Brad Tavares was on a 6-fight winning streak going into that fight, man. He was ranked number 8 in the world in this middleweight division for a reason. Middleweight is not lightweight, but it's not women's bantamweight, There's some killers. So I'm going to go with Adesanya. I think he gets done. TKO round 2. And I like the upset special in the main event, I must say. I do like Dustin Poirier to defeat Max Holloway. And here's why. I don't think it comes down to growth. I don't think it comes down to who overall has gotten better since that first meeting. I don't think it comes down to who, does this in grappling transitions, or who does this, who fades first, or who really comes in with the right game plan. As cliche and as cheesy sports movie-ish as this sounds, it really might come down to who just wants it more. While I would be doing you a disservice by leaving you at that with my only type of thing to say about it, this is one of those fights. A lot of things are even. I think Poirier knows he can finish Max on the feet and vice versa. I think that's where this fight is going to largely take place, if not for the entirety of its duration. And I think, I think we're gonna see some amazing shit from these two guys, man. I think, like I said earlier, it's about the little things with these two. It really also is going to be about not only who makes that first mistake, but who is able to capitalize and to what degree on that first mistake. Who is able to catch the other man at his worst moment. And not only that, who is able to do it at a more effective clip. If you give me all of those intertwining storylines wrapped up into one fight and put these two together and ask me to pick, given the circumstances, with every ounce of me wanting to just say, I don't care, because it's such a close fight to pick and it makes your brain hurt, I'm going with Poirier. I do think the weight class bump up is going to have maybe not a negative impact on Max, but I definitely think Max is going to be able to tell that he is no longer, as Diaz would like to call it, fighting midgets. Featherweights aren't midgets, but, Clearly, these two are not the same fighters they were when they met 7 years ago. However, clearly both of these two know that all too well heading into this fight. It will be interesting to see not who has improved more, but who has improved where in the critical areas necessary in order to get their hand raised and latch up a date with Khabib Nurmagomedov on Saturday night. If you like what you heard, if you like what you see, if you like what you want, if you want what you like, blah, blah, blah. Basically, if you want more of this content, you can subscribe on whatever channel or whatever medium you are choosing to listen to this podcast through. YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Speakerbox. Gonna keep giving you more content, keep giving you more stuff, man. For those that listen, I want to thank you very much. It means the world to me, from the bottom of my heart, to know people care about, what I have to say about these fights, and I'm gonna keep it coming. See y'all next week. We'll talk about UFC 236, what happened, what transpired. Might have a guest on next week. Don't know for sure yet, though. And talk a little bit about UFC St. Petersburg as well. Oleinik and Overeem in the spotlight for that next week. But until then, sign off. Catch you guys next time on the Bottom Line Podcast.